I need to make a distinction between two kinds of reason. There is the mere carrying out of logical steps, which I call rationalizing. And there is reason, which is what you would hope
Right.
for from a wise judge who has experience, can think logically, but can also bring to bear a vast amount of information about context and history and so on to bear on the situation. So reason is not the problem. A sort of narrow rationalistic approach is the problem. And I think that what has happened in our world is that we have banished reason, that balance of wise understanding with experience and the ability to see where things lead logically. We're losing that and replacing it by a mechanistic set of um, uh, unexamined principles chained together in unexamined chains of causation. And what I would say is that as a psychiatrist, you're particularly aware of this because perhaps the archetypal mental illness is schizophrenia. And as G.K. Chesterton already said 100 years ago or more, the madman is not somebody who has lost his reason. He has lost everything but his reason. So, for example, he's alone in a room. He hears a voice speaking to him. He looks around, there's nobody in the room. How can that voice be coming into the room? It must be coming through that plug socket over there, because that's the only entry point in this room. And where does that go to? Well, it goes to my neighbor's house. My neighbor is persecuting me. Or perhaps the police are monitoring. So instead of thinking, maybe I'm not that well, people do hear voices when there isn't one, they rationalize about it and reach an entirely false conclusion. And there's a further point to make, which is that when we purely rationalize, we can only deal with one train of thought at a time. So when we explicitly work our way through an argument, we're thinking of only one thing at any one time. But as has been pointed out by a great German jurist, so a professor of law, uh, people in organizations should be encouraged to use their intuition because their intuition roots all that thinking, which is very abstract, in the concrete realities of the lived world and enables us to draw on perhaps 10 or 12 strands of experience and thinking at the same time. So it produces a much more subtle, balanced, and sustained kind of vision than reasoning in that way. Reasoning in the sort of very constrained way is necessary, but largely when things break down. So it shouldn't be brought into play until there's a crisis, and then you think, okay, now let's work out what this crisis is about. A.N. Whitehead, who I think was probably the greatest philosopher of the last 100 years, said that exercise of logical reasoning is like cavalry charges in battle. He was writing around the time of the First World War. Like cavalry charges in battle, it can only be made at decisive moments. It's very costly and requires fresh horses. So that kind of reasoning is to get you out of a hole. But if your life is governed by trying to follow rules like that, you'll stop living. I believe that is actually happening. I believe that I quote a German novelist of the 19th century who was already saying, life no longer lives. I think one of the key things about the world at the moment is the devitalization, the lack of spontaneity, the lack of trust to intuition, the lack of trust, in fact. All these things are not expressible in algorithms, but are crucial for a fully flourishing life.